simple. We've currently got a very narrow lens and a narrow focus of how we define impact, and we really need to take a whole systems approach to it. And when we're looking at impact and dependencies on Earth, I mean, there's a distinction between nature and Earth that I can pick up on at a later stage if that's helpful for people. But right at this precise moment, we're sitting and we've had the net zero conversations dominating what's been happening in the sustainability world, or especially in the UK anyway. I'm not going to speak for a global aspect there. John can bring in his perspective of that one. And then we've got nature and biodiversity starting to come into the conversations, but it's very a narrow focus on impact and dependencies on nature rather than taking a whole systems approach. And what I mean by a whole systems approach is that looking at our impact and dependencies on nature as individuals, as organizations, is only one part of it. Is our culture individually, collectively within an organization driven by nature? Are the products and services that we use or the organization makes inspired by nature? Are the systems and processes and how the organization functions, are they modeled on nature? And is there a purpose embodied within the organization that is relevant to a thriving Earth where all life on Earth flourishes? And taking that whole systems lens kind of opens up that conversation. And a lot of the conversations that I tend to have at this precise moment is that narrow or that opening, I suppose, of this understanding of impact into, oh, this is what it really means if we're to put Earth at the heart and core of what we want to do. This is what the whole impact is. And something that I like to also refer to as well in terms of impact, because we're not really used to looking to nature, looking to Earth as a source of inspiration and modelling the systems that we create. But there was a wonderful study done by the WWF back in 2020, where they did an estimate that the contribution of Earth to the economy is actually 125 trillion US dollars each year in terms of the value of ecosystem services that it provides. Even thinking about that as a business, that kind of puts a lot of other businesses that are in existence that we're looking at for inspiration in a completely different category. So by the time that we're taking this whole systems approach to impact, understanding what we really mean and being able to actually quantify and start to put value on impact, especially Earth's impact for humanity, we start to get an entirely different conversation. But that's a whole mindset shift in order to be able to start exploring all of those different lenses.
Sustainability reporting's been around for quite some time, and lots of companies have been reporting against various metrics and produced by organisations like SASB and GRI, and there's been a fairly open-ended ability, if you like, for companies to report what they want and what they want to report, and with little accountability for accuracy and whether they're actually impactful, what they're doing. So what IFRS has done is created two sustainability standards. And not unlike financial standards, which many of us are used to, they are standards that set measurements and requirements for everybody. So it no longer becomes a free-for-all and you can report what you want or report only those things that appear to be good and perhaps not those that your company's doing that aren't so good. So the important point here is that organisations will be required to show what impact they have on the environment, and they'll be able to, and they'll need to give some assurance or get some external assurance that what they're saying is reasonable and fair. And I'm noticing, and these standards are being adopted over time. I don't know about other countries, but certainly in Australia, large companies start their requirement, their first annual reporting period requirement is 1 January, starts 1 January next year. And then smaller companies, 1 July 26, and then even smaller companies, and what I mean by even smaller companies, those that have revenue of $50 million are considered the small, and the large, who have to start on the 1st of January 25 here in Australia, are 500 million or more. And what I'm actually noticing is that there's being a lot of attention paid to those standards because they are mandatory to follow and been made so in my country, and I'm sure in many others. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of attention is being paid by executives of companies and boards of companies to do this as they are being asked to. So the standards are really there to hold companies accountable against measurement systems and reporting the things that they should report. They're also required to say what their climate risks might be. So I chair a port, for example, and when you look out long term, if the climate risk is, if we don't do things to make sure the environment is looked after and climate change is arrested, then there's risk to ports, for example, that water levels can go up and etc. And what used to be a berth for a ship, the ship pulls up against a pier, and the pier is a long way down, and unloading and all those sorts of things are difficult. But I'm not really making a joke of it. It's a serious issue, and so these standards are now holding people to account with regard to their environmental impact. I am noticing that where some organisations had targets that really they set because they thought they sounded good, are now resetting because they've had to really have targets that they actually can deliver, and because they are going to be held accountable for them. So that's the impact of the standards, and hopefully it impacts performance when people say they're going to lower emissions or have carbon neutrality, that they actually are doing it and are held accountable. I said it at the start, the good thing about the standards is that everybody will be required to measure the same way. And that's what financial accounting standards do. This is how you measure depreciation, or this is how you measure asset values and so on. Well, this is how you measure your impact on the environment.
In the past, organizations have been able to pick and choose metrics. There's been no standard of consistency. Organizations have been able to set incredible targets, but have absolutely no idea how they're going to achieve them. And they've been able to put things down on paper that look really good, but in practice, it's completely different story. And profit is still dominant, especially our narrow focus of profit. I'm always fascinated if you go and you look at the root, the etymology of words, and profit actually means to benefit. How do you benefit from it? And we've got this really narrow focus on profit only benefiting the businesses, the shareholders. instead of actually Earth and its wider ecosystem. So it can be siloed, not integrated into part of what a complete strategy is within business. And then what ends up happening is it can just be used to help business as usual kind of nudge along, looking good, using the greenwashing that John had said there, instead of creating this level of transformational change. So the fact that we are now looking at different ways, exactly what John had said, how do we actually get standardized measurements that are independently verified so that we can stop people saying one thing and then doing another, and I see that happening all over the place. I mean, there's stuff happening in the UK as well. I mean, I'm thinking of even with carbon accounting and it being independently verified. I co-founded an organization called Net Zero Nation a couple of years ago that helps businesses start their net zero journey. I know that there's a lot more than net zero, but it's a starting point where legislation is. And part of the core principles was that of how can we get you accurate information, set realistic targets in order to move things forward. So it's going to be interesting to see what the new phrase could end up being within the next 5-10 years that would replace triple bottom line thinking.
Well, you've moved me on to my favourite topic. Um, look, triple bottom line, and I was certainly around when it came to the fore, was a good concept because it was trying to have people understand that business was more than just financials. And the concept was good, but I think he's right. It got lost somewhere. But I'm a huge advocate for integrated reporting, as you mentioned. I'm part of that movement, if you like. And integrated reporting has as its concept that value is created by more than just sales and profits and sales minus expenses, if you like. The value is created by how, or destroyed by how you treat all the stakeholders, not just investors. And I'll get to that a bit more in a minute, but we talk a lot about ESG and the sustainability disclosure standards are certainly mostly around the E, and that's good. We should start somewhere. Climate is where we should start. But, so the E is, fundamentally about water use, quality of air, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, climate change and risks and so on. We know what the E is about, but not much do we talk about the S and the G, and we should be talking about the S and G. And if you want to change it to be triple bottom line, make it E, S and G. Happens to be 3. We could put that into that context. But the social factors I'm talking about are, labour practices, health, safety, human rights, freedoms, well-being and quality of life, inclusion and non-discrimination, social cohesion, community resilience. They're all the social factors that organisations should be looking at as well if they're serious about ESG. And of course, governance is business ethics, bribery, corruption, anti-competitive behaviour, data privacy, tax transparency, and I can go on, right? We sort of know a long list of governance like disclosures and transparencies and so on. But integrated reporting is designed to report about how your company or firm or entity, not-for-profit, whatever it is, impacts all the shareholders. So staff, customers, suppliers, the community, nature, people. This is where human rights comes into play. And today, 70%, I think, is the number of the value of an organisation is in intangibles. And those intangibles are things like intellectual property, human capital, you know, how you treat your customers. I mean, there are plenty of examples in my country where customers have been treated poorly, and the value, if you want to measure it in stock market terms, declines if you treat customers badly, or they stop buying from you. Or if you treat suppliers badly. There's examples here where companies have thought they were doing the right thing by reducing milk prices to consumers, but the good old supplier, the farmer, was getting raped and pillaged, if you like. And so what integrated reporting is aimed at is making sure organisations think about all the impact of their decisions on all stakeholders. And that naturally will cover E, S, and G. And quite frankly, the report's one thing, but what I see good companies doing is when they're deciding their strategy, and many of us go away for 2 days, management and board teams, and we think through strategies, talk about strategies, they should be based in integrated thinking. So if we're going to go down a strategic path, let's think about it in an integrated way, meaning how is this decision or this strategy going to impact all stakeholders? And so you're thinking about investors, of course, they want some money, they want a return. You're going to think about how does it impact our own staff and their skilling, etc. How does it impact customers? Are we doing the right thing by customers? Will they stay with us? Will more join? How are we impacting suppliers? Are we using suppliers that are treating their labour fairly, etc., etc.? And I could go on, but the point is, I believe triple bottom line reporting was a good concept. It's morphed into integrated reporting. Yeah, it's a very good question. And what these standards has also made organisations do, which is a good thing as well, is have a look at their own practices in terms of measuring. And in some cases, many have had to spend some money to make sure that what their systems that measure emissions, or their systems that measure waste, their systems that they're basing their numbers on to report are actually sound. And so many companies have you know, I think what reporting has been in this area, sustainability, has been best endeavours or management's best estimate. You'll often see those words used. Now they've got to put the systems and processes in place so the numbers can be assured. So my confidence level is rising because the standards are requiring that it be far more accurate and not just the best endeavours attempt.
As a starting point, the perspective that I hold, and when I look at measuring impact and value on Earth, starts very much with the distinction that I talked about earlier in terms of the difference between nature and Earth. And there is research that shows that even people who feel connected to nature can think of people and nature as separate. And that happens a lot in terms of the conversations that we have, where nature is something externally out there. It's that environment part that, you know, if we're looking at the ESG that John was mentioning, nature's the environment. It's out there. But actually, it's also within us, and it's in the social part, that S there. And when we're able to shift and see that humans are actually part of Earth, it's why I don't like the language people and planet, because Earth includes everything in Earth, people and the society, the governance aspect. It's all important. So coming from that perspective of if we don't recognize that we are part of Earth and have a relationship with Earth, whether we call it rewilding ourselves, but if we don't see ourselves within the context of the ecosystem and recognize our role within it, how then can we develop a real understanding of what it means for impact and value? Because we can translate the value based on the company. John was also saying this in terms of stakeholders as well, but we want to create benefit and value for everybody. And I noticed that Philip had made a comment in the chat earlier on in terms of, well, how do you value nature? And one of the ways is, but well, how do we incorporate social and environmental costs in pricing? And for me, this whole point of rewilding ourselves or starting from that place of connection with nature allows us to actually start redefining the value and having different conversations. And it's something that for me has been really interesting over the years. And I know that you talked about the impact of the coaching, and I will come to that after I talk a bit about I used to run a podcast where I interviewed sustainable business leaders, and I interviewed over 176 sustainable business leaders, and I asked them two questions at the end of it. What's your favorite time or favorite memory of time or place in nature? And how has this influenced and impacted your work? And it was really interesting that a lot of people didn't actually make the connection that the time that they spent in the natural world was actually fundamental for how they were then showing up within sustainable business. And it was helping develop systems thinking, it was boosting energy, mood, it was creating long-term decision making because they were seeing things different, they were able to hold better relationships with people. And for me, this is the impact and the value of working, I would say, co-coaching with nature, having Earth as a partner in how you move forward, because it changes the conversation. It makes something that's been quite implicit very explicit. You're getting value and benefit from time in the natural world, from Earth's ecosystems in each and every moment of your life. So how then do you start changing the way that you look in business, changing the way that you think about impact, and changing the way that you think about value? And for me, one of the reasons that that kind of like underpins the approach that I take, Philippa, is because I don't know any other way of creating those conversations. I think it's, for me, it's been the most powerful conversation starter to be able to get people to consciously deepen their appreciation and learn to value what they receive from the natural world for their own health and well-being, and then naturally want to expand that out further, you know. And there is an evidence base that supports all this as well, because I do appreciate the value of an evidence base there. And I think it's really interesting to see that impact and value start to change, and you can have more meaningful conversations because you have either rewilded yourself, you've developed a deeper relationship, because you're now starting to value nature differently in a way that you maybe haven't consciously, because it's not in mainstream business conversation. Business as usual is not saying, hey, you've got to value, if we use ESG, you've got to value the environment, value society, and value the governance to the extent that it should. So it just allows for those conversations to happen in a far more meaningful way, and to give tangible, full-bodied sensory experiences that bring a lot of the heady concepts around impact and systemic change down back to earth, for want of a better pun, and easier for people to engage with and relate with, because they're having a lived experience of seeing, for example, how an ecosystem functions in a different way. They're seeing themselves as part of that. And then it makes it easier to go, okay, I get that value. Now let's look at how I can then apply that back to business. So I hope all that makes sense, because my mind was going off in 20 million different places simultaneously, Philippa.
Look, I think it comes back to what I was talking about earlier, that, you know, because I take an organisation perspective, because I've spent all my life in one or several, and if you are thinking about your place on the earth, if you like, then you should be thinking about your impact on everything. And I've talked about impact on staff, customers, suppliers, but I did mention nature. So you take the port again. What's the impact of ships coming up a channel on the life of, birds and fish and all those sorts of things, and the plant life around a port. So I tend to call that community, but it's because hopefully community cares about the nature around them. And so how do you measure that? I think the measurement for an organisation is that if you're not seen as a take the port again, if you're not responsible with how you deal with the nature or that you are engaged with, then you will be I won't use the word punished, but you will be not held in a good light, and it can impact the value of your organisation. Because I'm talking about, the integrated thinking is the value of the organisation comes from how you treat all these things, and how people today are now looking for more than, yes, they want an investment return, of course they do, but they're looking at how are you behaving in terms of environment, in terms of socially, and that includes your behaviour to nature. And I think it is measurable if you don't perform well in one of those things, then it can impact you, impact value.
It's always good. It depends how you want to define responsibility. And I think there's many different ways of doing it. If we bring it back to if Earth were a leader, how would Earth function? And I did a piece of research for one of my master's thesis on looking at the human relationship between nature and Earth. And there were 6 key benefits that emerged. And then when I looked at them further, there are also actually 6 key characteristics of how Earth functions. Now, the reason that I'm mentioning this is that when we look at the 6 of them, we have got regulated. Well, the Earth knows how to regulate itself. Responsive, responsibility. The Earth knows how to respond appropriately, which I think responsibility, if we get a definition of it, is that we do know how to respond appropriately. The Earth is resilient, it can bounce back. The Earth is reciprocal. There is a mutual value exchange that exists. The Earth is reverential, it supports life, and the Earth is realised. It has a purpose, sustaining life, which it's done successfully for 3.8 billion years. So the whole concept of responsibility, I think, for me, is actually fundamental from us individually, but also as part of how Earth functions.
Well, again, I'll narrow it down to a organisation example. So in this country, Australia, we have modern slavery legislation, and that organisations have a responsibility to make sure there isn't modern slavery. And so it's the organisation's responsibility to make sure that take the port again, in their supply chain, that the ships that come into the port, the seamen on the ships are not, that they are paid correctly and treated well, right? And as the chair of the port, I sign off that I've checked that there isn't modern slavery in our chain of labour that is used for the port's activity. So I think there is a responsibility that's sheeted back to organisations. So I've taken it to a much more micro level, Tabitha, but and we should be responsible for those sort of things and impact those sort of things where we can.
I think that it's good that you've brought it back to the organisational level, because I think it's really important that everything that we're talking about here can be translated and understood on an organisational level. And I think part of the challenge a lot of the times when we're looking at the language around this is that the language of business is so different to some of the ideas that can be talked about here, that there actually becomes a translation piece where ideas are being missed. And how do we make sure that we are putting it into an organisational level, but also in a way that it makes it easy for organizations to understand, so that it's not a case of having to learn a new language, which I know is a criticism that sometimes comes up when I speak to people of, this is great, but what does it mean on a business level? So I really appreciate the value of being able to speak to that level, John. For me, I bring it back down to earth, always and all time, because there are so many benefits that we as humans receive from that connection and engaging with the natural world that shifts our interior condition. When our interior condition shifts, we can shift the interior conditions of an organization, and then we can shift the wider conversations that happen as well. So for me, it really all does start with, how do we cultivate those qualities that we want to see within the world within ourselves, and be able to model them in our behaviors on an individual level and on a collective level, because that then is part of what, when we're measuring impact, we really want to be doing. And I think John highlighted the example of investors quite beautifully. You know, if investors recognize that there is an interconnected relationship between society, between the environment as well, and want to recognize that their investment will be impacted with that, there is an interior quality happening there, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, that is starting to help shift the conversations around value and impact.
Well, I would say the new triple bottom line is ESG. And the way to think about ESG is in an integrated way. And what I mean by that is that you think about all your stakeholders and the value they create, or if not treated well, the value that might be destroyed. And what the reporting should be is how you're treating them and how you're treating them well.